Make sure you support DHCP. Go ahead and just hit OK. Hit OK. And then for a machine, and make sure any machine that you use, again, any machine that you use in this course, make sure you set it to NAT network if you're using VirtualBox. So you can come in here, click on a machine like this mail machine I have here. You can just click on that, settings, go to network, and then you can go ahead and just go to NAT network. All right. And that name right here, you see name NAT network. That's all we're going to use. That'll automatically set it up. So when you have a Kali machine running later and you have Keyoptrix or another box running, or even when we build out an Active Directory lab, you need to make sure that you're running that NAT network so that all of the machines are on the same subnet. If you don't, you might run into a situation where the same IP comes up for the same machine and then they're conflicting with each other, or you get on different networks and some weird stuff happens. So make sure, again, that it's imperative that you're setting that NAT network for every single machine that you're setting up. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video in this section. The first thing I'd like to do before we get started with any commands or anything like that is just take a look around Kali Linux and kind of demonstrate why a pen tester or ethical hacker might use this distribution of Linux. Now, throughout the course, as stated in the last video, you might see a different version of this pop up as I recorded videos on some of the older versions. Everything should still work just as is. You just might see a different look and feel to some of the Kali interface, but all the commands I'm going to show you, everything that we do is going to be the same. So let's take a look and just explore Kali Linux just for a bit. So if we come up here into the corner and we just click on the little Kali logo, you can see that we have nice things broken out for us. So we've got these favorites up here, which we have our terminal, which we're going to be living in essentially. We've got a text editor, we've got a web browser, which is basically Firefox. We've got some other tools down here, docs, etc. The other thing that we can come scroll through is we can see that we have different applications in here. If we look at the different sections, these kind of go in order, which we haven't covered quite yet, but in the order of how a hack might go down. So information gathering is usually the first step. You can come in here, look through this, and here's a bunch of tools related to information gathering. You can even click into these and go deeper if you wanted to, related to specific things. So DNS or SMB or open source intelligence. All of this that's in here, this is just built-in tools. So let's say we're coming in here and we want to do a wireless attack. Well, we go to wireless attacks. We've got a bunch of tools already built in. So Kali Linux is just essentially a ethical hacking distribution of Linux, and it's built on Debian. So if you've ever used something like Ubuntu or anything along those lines of a Debian distribution, this is all going to feel really familiar to you with just a bunch of tools built in on top of it. So fairly straightforward. They do have some nice tools in here. You can come through and utilize these. A lot of this is already built in, and we're going to take a look at that as we go. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is, and throughout the rest of this course, is start looking at the terminal. So if you come up here, you'll see that we have a terminal. Now, mostly everything that we do is going to be done in this terminal here. Now, this is almost like accessing the command line. So if you're using a command line like in Windows, for example, if you've ever used a command line, if not, that's okay. But we do a lot of this from this interface as opposed to maybe utilizing a GUI-based interface where if we clicked a folder, this might look more familiar to you if you're a Windows or Mac user. You come in here, you have this kind of area. Yeah, we can do that, and sometimes we'll utilize this, but a lot of times we're going to be living right here. Okay, so as we move forward, we're going to start talking about this command line, how we can utilize it and use it to our advantage, and then we'll do some tips and tricks and hopefully learn some pretty neat stuff as we go. So in the next video, I'm going to cover the sudo feature, which I think is important. It's something that was brought in. Now, originally we had something called a root permission, and we'll talk about that. That has changed since 2020.1 moving forward. So we're introducing that into this course, and we'll talk options that you have. So let's go ahead and move to the next video where we talk about the sudo feature. All right, so before we look at any commands or learn any command line, we have to talk about sudo. Sudo is very important, and what had happened previously was that in the earlier versions of Kali Linux, we ran as a user called root. Root is the ultimate user. You could think of it as the administrator of the machine. Now we're running as a user called Kali, so we don't have root privileges directly. This is as an improved security feature because we should be running only certain commands when we need to as the root user. So what we're going to see is we're going to see how we can run commands as an elevated privilege, and we're going to do that with sudo, which stands for super user do. They just kind of shortened it, so we just have sudo now, okay? Now with sudo, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want to run a command elevated. I want to run this as a higher user. In this instance, we can say, I want to run the command as root. Why is that important? Well, let's take a look at an example. Let's say that I wanted to look at a very sensitive file. Now, one sensitive file in our system is the etc shadow file. You can see cat etc like this, etc shadow. And you don't have to follow along right now. You don't have to really understand what's going on if you've never seen Linux. All I'm doing is saying, hey, I want to print out this file. I want to look at it, okay? And for here, I can't see it. It says permission denied. You don't have the access to see this file. That's a good thing. But if I was the root user or somebody that had elevated privileges, I could see it. So I could say sudo cat etc shadow like this. Okay, and it's going to say, what is your password for Kali? I'm going to go ahead and say Kali, K-A-L-I, hit enter. And now I can see that I have access to this file. And this file is very sensitive. We'll talk about this later on in the course, but sensitive file, okay? So when we're looking at it, I ran that command specifically as the root user. As the root user, I'm able to see, okay, this file now. Why, or what's going on here? Well, we're running that specific command, right? And we're still staying as Kali. We're doing this in a kind of one-off scenario. So there will be times where something that you run in this course might require sudo, or you can run the command without sudo, but you notice something doesn't work. So best practice for this is saying, hey, let's go ahead and just run mostly everything that I'm showing you command-wise in this course. That's not best practice overall. Usually you should run things just as a regular user. If you get permissions blocked, then run it as sudo as necessary. Now, the other thing to point out, and we'll talk about this again later on in the course, but why can we do this is because this user is part of what's called a sudoers file, meaning we can have this permission. Not any user can come in here. Say we made a new user and we just called the user John. We can't just take John and just go ahead and just run these commands as root. No, John has to have the permission to do this. So you can think of Kali as being an administrator, but only when we utilize that access or that privilege. Okay, the other thing I want to show you though is that we can switch over to root if we want to. We can come in here and we can say sudo switch user dash, just like that. And then I'll put us into root. Now you can see, okay, we're running root at Kali. And that's only for this instance. You can, if you want, I'm not going to demonstrate how to do this, but you can, if you want, change the root password, log out, and log back in as root, and run through this course as root. Again, that's not best security practice, but that feature is available to you if you are a Linux user that is comfortable with Linux, comfortable with running as root, and you want the easy path. Otherwise, I highly recommend just staying as Kali, running as sudo privileges as you need it, and then moving forward. But this is a quick way to switch into root if you need to. Sometimes even running sudo causes some issues, so switching to root to run a command is okay. What we can do here too is a demonstration is we can go file new tab and look at a new instance, and you'll see that this instance of root is only good for this tab here. Once we start a new tab, we're going to be brought back right back to Kali. You can see that from the top line in the tab as well. So just keep note of this when you're running commands in this course. If you see something, again, try running it with sudo if it's not working, or if it says access denied, then you know, hey, I need to run sudo. Very, very, very important. Okay, I'm trying to drive that into your brains right now. So from here, we're going to move on. We're going to start looking at how to navigate around the file system, taking a look at everything from a bigger picture and diving into terminal. So I will see you over in the next video. Now we're going to take a look at the Linux terminal. And if you're a user of a regular computer like Windows or even Mac OS, you are probably used to using what is called a GUI, or a graphical user interface. And we can do this with our version of Linux. We can come in here, and if we want to like go to folders, we can absolutely open this and go to folders. We've got the ability to go to Firefox. We've got all of our tools in here that we want to use or look at. And we have a graphical user interface. However, a lot of our time is going to be spent on the command line and using a terminal. So it's very important that we learn how to use a terminal in Linux. So looking at our terminal here, we can see a few things before we even get started. The first thing is that we have a Kali at Kali. What does that mean? Well, the first instance here is Kali. That is your user. So remember, when we first logged in as Kali, and that is our user. So if we ever switch over to root, we'll see root here. The second part of this is our host name. So our computer name happens to also be Kali. If you change your host name, you could say whatever you wanted to say here. The last little part of this is this a tilde. This is actually the directory that you are currently in. So this is a quick way to say, what user am I, what workstation am I on, and what directory am I in. Now we can take a look at what directory we are in with the pwd command, and that stands for print working directory. And in this instance, you can see we are in the home/Kali folder, and that is the equivalent of being in the tilde. So if you see the tilde, that just means you are in your user's home folder. So if we were a root user, we would actually be in the /root folder as opposed to the home Kali folder. So the tilde means something different for every user that you're on. The next thing we're going to look at is the change directory feature. So imagine that we are in our folder here. So if we go to like, I don't know, our desktop, and we're sitting in our Kali folder, this is really what we're looking at. So we're looking at Kali right here, and we want to get out of this Kali folder and change into another folder, say like, I don't know, downloads, for example. If we go into downloads, it's very easy to click into, but how do we navigate around on the terminal? I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is use the cd command. That stands for change directory. Now, if we do change directory ... that says I want to go backwards. So if I do that, now you can see that we are in the /home folder, but we can also do a pwd, print the working directory, and you can see that we are in the home folder. Now, can we go any further back? Well, let's try cd ... again. And now you can see we are at a /. If we do a pwd, we are at a /. And one more time, I'm going to cd ... and see if anything happens. Nothing happens here. We cannot change any further. We are in what is called our base directory. So if you see a /, think of that as the base folder. You cannot go any further back from that. Now I'm going to clear my screen. If you want to clear your screen, you just hit Control-L like that, and that'll clear the screen. And from here, we are going to look at what is in our base folder. And to do that, we can use a tool called list, which is ls. So from here, we can see different colors and different things. And we can tell based on the colors, though these color schemes are not the greatest in the newest Kali Linux, we can still see like, hey, this darker version of blue is actually a folder where some of these other things are actually files. We don't have to worry too much about that right now, but we just came out of the home folder. So we can see here that we have a bunch of files and folders. And let's say we want to go back to the home folder. Well, we can cd home. And I'm going to start typing H, and I'm just going to hit tab. And because there's nothing else in here with an H, we don't have to worry too much. It will just autocomplete to the home folder. Now, for example, if there's a bunch of L's, I'm going to back up really quick before I hit enter. If I wanted to try something that has multiple items in here, if I try the L and I hit tab, you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of options for me to go through. And depending on what you have is when you can autocomplete. So if I start typing LO, it should know that there's only one LO, and I can tab and autocomplete the rest. So you just have to be able to get to a point where you can tab out Or if you know the first letter of the file that you're looking for, you can hit tab on that and you can see, okay, here's where I need to be, or here's what I can look at with everything that starts with that letter. So I'm going to delete this and we're going to cd back into home. We're going to ls to list the contents of home, which is just our Kali folder. So I'm going to cd into Kali. And if I ls from here, you could see that I have our desktop, documents, downloads, similar to what we saw in the graphical user interface when we were in the folder. Now we can see it from our terminal. Now, before we go diving deeper into these folders, something that I want to look at is what if I wanted to get to this Etsy folder over here? So there's this Etsy folder that was in our base. Now, if I try to cd into Etsy from here, nothing's going to work. I'm tabbing, nothing works. If I try cd Etsy, it's going to say I can't find it. So what does that mean? Well, when we change directories, we can only change directories from the folders that we have available to us. So I can only change directories into these folders by using that sort of nomenclature. However, if I can provide a full directory or a full path, then I can cd from any folder that I'm in. So if I go cd /, because remember we have the base here, well then I can say /et, start typing that out, and guess what? I get Etsy here. And if I wanted to dive deeper into what folders are in there, I could hit tab and I could see all the folders that are available in the Etsy folder to complete my task. Now, if I hit enter, I will be brought into the Etsy folder. And similarly, I can hit ls and see all the files and folders that are in here. Now let's just cd here, and I'm going to use the tilde, and that's going to get us back to our home folder. I'm going to Control L to clear screen, and then I'm going to ls again, and you're going to see we're back where we just were. Now, in this case, what if I wanted to list the files of the Etsy folder? Well, it's the same thing. I could do ls /Etsy, and that will list all the files as if I were sitting in that folder. So just know that you can list folders and files. You can change directories from being within another directory. It doesn't have to be in that same up and down tree that I was showing you. There's a lot more robustness to these commands. Same thing, if we ls in here, we could take a look at the folders, and we don't have to change the directory to see what's in these folders. We can just ls desktop, for example, and start auto tab completing. There's nothing in there. I do have something in the downloads folder just because I changed my picture. I put our TCM security logo in there. So I have that in the downloads folder, but it's completely normal not to have anything in your desktop or downloads when you first install Kali. And again, we can achieve the same thing by cding into downloads and then hitting ls. You have the same object here as you saw before, except we're just now in that folder. So you have to declare the folder or be within the folder to see the contents. Okay, now let's go ahead and cd back to the base folder. You could cd ... or just use the tilde. I'm going to clear my screen. And from here, we want to talk about making a directory. So let's make a directory. I'm going to make a directory called Heath. You can just use your first name if you want. And then when you ls in here, you could see now that the Heath directory is here. And I could cd into that Heath directory. I can ls in that directory, and there's not going to be anything in there. So I'm going to go ahead and back up one. And now I'm going to show you how to remove a directory or remove a folder. So you say rm-dir, and you're going to go ahead and just say Heath, and that will remove that. These commands work exactly the same as everything else. If I wanted to make a directory in the base folder, I could totally make dir /Heath if I wanted to. And I could also remove that from here. So again, it doesn't matter exactly where you're at as long as you're using full file paths. Okay, so I've cleared my screen, and now I want to run ls. And you see in ls that we just have a bunch of folders, but that's not entirely true. What we're going to do is we're going to do an ls-la, and I like to think of this as list all, but really it stands for long all. And if we hit enter, you can see that there's a bunch of new files in here, and folders actually. So from this, we can see that we have like a bash history, we've got a .java folder. Anything with a dot is considered a hidden file. We won't see that when we're using the ls command. We actually have to do a -la command. And this is a great time to actually take a look at what these subcommands are and
how are some ways that we can identify what these things mean? So I'm going to show you a website first, and I think this website is awesome. We can go to something like explainshell.com. So it is explain shell. You can see it auto-completing up there, but explainshell.com. And if you came in here and you wanted to take a look, let me make this a little bit bigger. If you wanted to take a look at like ls-la, you could say, okay, explain this to me. And it'll tell you, okay, the first part is ls. That means list directory contents. Remember I called it the list command? That's what it is. Now, what does that LA do? Well, the L, you hover over it, says use long listing format. And the A says use all. Okay, so do not ignore entries starting with a dot, which is what we're looking for. And the long listing just gives us more detail. It gives us these file permissions, which we'll get into a little bit later, and who owns it, and what the file size is it a directory, etc., etc. We'll get down into that in just a few videos. We can also use what are called man pages. I'm going to Control L again. If we do man ls, man stands for manual. So man ls, we could see in here that ls means list directory contents. Great. -A stands for all. Do not ignore entries starting with a period. Same thing as we saw before. We could scroll down, look for the L portion of this, and we'll see that we have use a long listing format. You can hit Q to quit this. So if you don't have internet access, for example, you can use the man pages. I like using explainshell.com. I think it's pretty awesome, but man works very quick. And from the terminal, you don't have to leave or do anything. Another thing that you can do is ls-help. And that will give you similar to the man pages, though not as full detail, I guess is the best way to say it. And you come in here and you can see the same kind of switches and commands that were in here. So --help works for a lot of commands. It's one of those that you should know and you should try if you have any questions about what you're trying to do. It's a great resource. So if we ls-la, we can cd into one of these hidden folders. Like we could cd into .cache, for example, and we just ls that. You can see that there's actually stuff in the cache in here. So we're not going to get into this. I just want to show you that hidden files and folders do exist. So if you're looking for something, especially pen test related, something might be hidden. If you're on a Linux machine, you might need to do ls-la to see a hidden file. And they're incredibly easy to see, as you can see for yourself. So let's go ahead and cd back to our home folder. And from here, I'm going to show you a couple of things that we're going to explain later on, but I just kind of want to get you familiar with it. So the first thing I want to show you is the echo command. If we go echo and we use a single apostrophe and we say hi like this, that's just going to echo out to the screen. We'll get into the echo command a little bit later on in the course. What we're doing here is we're going to echo this into a file. So I'm going to say hi, and then I'm going to put that file, I'm going to use this greater than symbol, and that's going to be a redirection operator. And I'm going to say, hey, just go ahead and make a file called test.txt. And while you don't need to know this yet, if I ran cat on this, on test.txt, you'll see that it prints back out hi. Okay, so I just want to have this file here that we created. And what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly ls. We're going to see that it's there. You can see that there are color differences for files and folders again. And the reason we're making this in this video is I want to show you the copy command. So if we run copy on this, we could say copy test.txt. What I want to do is I want to copy this into the downloads folder. So I can just say copy test.txt into downloads. If we ls, we'll see that test.txt is here. We're making a copy. If we ls downloads, we can see that test.txt is actually in there as well. So similar with the remove directory, we can use the rm command, and what we're going to do is remove that file. And again, we don't have to be in the directory to remove it. We can call the directory path and then test.txt. If we hit ls on downloads again, we can just go ahead and hit enter, and you're going to see that there is no test.txt in there anymore. But if we ls here, you'll see that test.txt does exist. So I'm going to go ahead and Control L. The opposite of this is the move command. Now, if I move test.txt and I put that into downloads, if I ls now, you're going to see that there is no test.txt in here. Why is that? Well, if we ls downloads, you're going to see that we moved it. So remember, copy leaves an original version wherever you copied from. Move completely moves it. So the cp and the mv commands are what you need to know there. Now, while we're on this, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a command called locate. So locate's pretty awesome. If you did locate and say I wanted to find out where that test.txt file is, I could do locate test.txt, and we're probably not going to get anything back quite yet. Now, if we're looking through this, none of these files are where we're at. So there are some test.txt files on this machine, but we're not seeing the one that we created. So say that we created a file, we can't remember where we put it, and we just want to go search for it and find it. What we can do is we can say update db, and you're going to see that we actually get a denied. Why are we getting permission denied? Well, this comes back to sudo. So let's go ahead and sudo update db. You're going to enter in your sudo password. It's going to update the database. And now if we do locate test.txt, and you can just, when you see a screen like this, by the way, where it's kind of semi-gray, if you just hit the right arrow, that will go ahead and autocomplete because it remembers your last command. You can hit that. And you can now see that the first entry in here is home Kali downloads test.txt. So now the database is updated and it finds it. One other thing to mention, I just talked about auto-completing with the right arrow. If you hit the up arrow, you can go through your previous commands. You can see all the commands that I've been running through. So we can also use the down arrow to scroll back down through those commands. So say I wanted to run that locate test.txt command again, and instead of typing it out, I just hit the up arrow, and then I hit enter. Easy breezy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and remove downloads test.txt. And now that file should be gone. We can ls one more time into downloads just to make sure. And you can see that TCM security final is the only thing that's in there. One other thing to point out that I just noticed actually is these files are case sensitive and the folders are case sensitive. So if I try to cd into downloads, it's not going to work because downloads doesn't exist. So if I cd into downloads, like it's spell, then you can see that I actually get into the downloads folder. So note that it's case sensitive. Autocomplete, if I go back, will do a pretty decent job at trying on newer versions of Kali, that is. If I hit do, for example, and then I tab, it'll realize that I'm trying to get to downloads. So the last thing I'm going to show you is the password command, and that is passwd. We are going to be good security engineers and change our password. We're going to make it a strong password because we're good security engineers. I am going to be the bad security engineer and make my password password. And I'm doing that because later on in the course, we'll talk about cracking Linux passwords, and we're going to use my bad password as an example. So here we're going to type our current password. Kali is a terrible password, by the way. And we're going to go ahead and type in our new password. You can make your password whatever you want. I'm making mine password. And now we have updated successfully, and we have finished all the commands that we need to know for this video. I'll go ahead and see you in the next lesson. Now we're going to talk about users and privileges. So in the last video, we learned about ls-la. So I am in my home folder, which is the tilde here, and all I'm going to do is just say ls-la. I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to see a bunch of stuff over here on the left-hand side. We've got this, we've got the details kind of ownership, we've got some file size in here, and we'll talk about all of this. But when we do ls-la, we're getting so much more information than whether or not a file is hidden, which is kind of the purpose we looked at it for last time. But now we can take it and look at it from a different scope or lens. We can see that we have this column here, the first column. Now the first column tells us something interesting. It first tells us whether or not we are looking at a file or a directory. So if we see a D here, we are seeing that this is a directory. Note that these are also color coded, right? So we have blue for directories, it looks like, and then white here for files. And then we also have links, which we're not going to get into much right now, but a link looks like it's a lighter blue. So we have the indicator here first. It says, okay, it's either a D or maybe a dash or an L. There are other settings that could be here, but for now, this is all we need to worry about. The next set of things that we're going to look at are these RWXs or R blank X. What does that all mean? Well, RWX means read, write, execute. When we're missing one of those, like a dash here, that just means we have a read and execute. And there are actually three groups that we're looking at here. So we have the first group, which is the owner of our file. So this first group says read, write, execute for the owner of this file. And if we look at the owner of the file, we can actually see that the owner is going to be Kali. Well, in this instance, it's the directory. But here we're looking at Kali. You can see that one of these has root listed, but in this instance, since we're using the Kali user and we're in our home folder, we're looking at mostly Kali being the file owner for this. The next one we're going to look at is we're going to say, okay, group membership. So anybody that is a part of this group, what do they get ownership to, or what do they get to do with this directory or this file? Well, anybody in this group can read or execute, but they cannot write to this directory or file. And lastly, we have the third setting, which is all other users. What can all other users do? All other users can read and execute, but they cannot write here. And we don't have anything in here besides this link that is read, write, execute. We don't have a world read, write, execute in this folder, and that's okay. This does come into play when we're doing penetration testing. However, when we want to find some sort of file that has read, write access or read, write, execute access, if we have full access, that is ideal, especially if there are some sensitive files that we're not supposed to see, or maybe we're misconfigured, or if we need somewhere to write to on the disk. For example, if I clear the screen here and we do an ls-la of the temp folder, we could see that temp actually has read, write, execute privileges throughout. This is a great place when we're doing pen testing and we're working on a Linux machine, that if we need to come drop a file, we know that this temp folder can be written to, we can write whatever file we want and execute these files from here without having to worry about too many permissions. So if we're attacking machines later on, especially as we get on into the practical ethical hacking course, you may see me go and use the temp folder to upload malware or write a malicious file or something that I can do from a folder that is read, write, executable. So let's clear the screen again. Now, another reason and importance for the read, write, execute is that if we write a script, we won't be able to execute that script until we have full access to do so. That's going to become more important as we download files and try to run them against machines. But even in this little section, when we're looking at the bash scripting, we're going to need to be able to execute our script, and we're going to need to be able to change the permissions on that. Let's go ahead and do that here. We're going to create a little text file and just look at the permissions and how things change. So similar to the last video, we're going to do an echo, and we're just going to say hello. And in this, we are going to use our directional operator, and we are going to just put this in a hello.txt file. If we ls-la, we could see that hello.txt is in here, but look at the permissions that are set. We have read-write permissions. We don't have any execute permissions. If this was a script or anything that we're trying to run, the machine will not let us run it because we do not have the execute permissions. Same thing here. Everybody else can only read this file. They cannot write or execute this file. So we can change the permissions on this, and we can do that with the chmod, which stands for change mode. So I'm going to go ahead and clear screen again, and we can do a chmod. And there's two different ways to do this. The first way is to do something like a plus sign and then give the permissions that you want set for that file. So we could do something like rwx, that is read, write, execute. If you wanted just read access or read, write access or just write access, you would put the appropriate lettering there. And let's go ahead and just give this a read, write, execute. And I'm going to say hello.txt and hit enter. And we're going to go ahead and ls-la again. And now you can see that the color of this has changed. Why? It is fully read, write, executable for us as the user. Okay, as the owner, I should say. So that's one way of doing it. However, there is another way of doing this as well. We can say chmod 777 hello.txt, hit enter, do an ls-la, And you'll see now that everything has read, write, execute here. Well, what changed? What is this 777 and why is it so important? Okay, for that, we're going to jump over to PowerPoint for just a second. Okay, so we have different numbers that we can set for the CH mod. And remember, we did 777 because we gave a 7 to each group. We had the first, second, and third groups. Remember that. Well, what does 7 mean? Well, 7 means read, write, execute. So for a read permission, we get 4 points. For a write, we get 2, and for execute, we get 1. So as you can see down here, we have 4 plus 2 plus 1. That equals 7. Well, if we had no permissions, that would be 0. So we could do something like a 700. You might see something like read only, and then you would just give it 444 across the board, for example. Or I've seen something like an SSH PEM file, and those files require specific permissions. Typically, it is 644. So that would say that the owner has read, write, but no execute, and then the rest of everybody else has just read access to that file. So that would be a 644 permission. So if you ever wonder what the permissions mean, you can always refer back to a chart like this or quickly Google what do the CH mod numbers mean. Just know if you want to give something full permissions, you are going to set 777 across the board. And if we're doing hacking or doing penetration testing, that's often what we're going to use, with the exception of PEM files where they have to have more restricted permissions, sometimes 644, sometimes actually 400 is what I've seen as well. From here, let's go back to our Kali machine, and I'm going to go ahead and Control L to clear the screen. Here, we want to take a look at adding a user. So we're going to do a sudo add user, and you can give whatever username you want. I'm going to just call this user John. It's going to ask for our sudo password. Remember, we changed our password, so make sure you put in the right password. And now it's going to say, okay, what password do you want to use for John? I'm going to go ahead and enter that, and I'm going to enter it again. And then you could just hit enter through all of this and get back to this screen where it says Kali at Kali. From here, we're going to go ahead and switch user and go into John. So just do su John. I'm going to ask for John's password. Go ahead and give that password. And now you can see that we are John at Kali. So what is special about John? Well, we've made a new user, and John has some permissions. Now, if we wanted to cat out like the Etsy password file, we can. And this is a very common file that you're going to look at as a pen tester. If you come in here, the Etsy password file is important. This is something that we can see a lot of information about this machine. Now, the Etsy password file is called the password file not because it has our password in it, but because it used to store our password in it a very, very long time ago. Now what is being done is they put an X here for a placeholder, and that placeholder is then filled in with the shadow file, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. So we are using the cat command, and you've seen me use this several times throughout the course. We are using that to basically print out a file. So when we print out the file, we can read the file. So from here, we're reading the file and we're saying, okay, I see root. Root is the 0 user ID, and that is important. That's telling us they are the ultimate user on the machine. They are user 0. If we scroll way down to the bottom, we should see some users that were created here. For example, we see Kali. Kali is user 1000, pretty common. We can also see that John is in use here, and John is user 1001. We could see what type of shell type they're using and what their home folder is as well. You could see the ZSH shell type compared to John's bin bash. So they are different shell types, and we'll get into those a little later on. But from here, we can also see roots here. We can see the root shell type, and we can also see what kind of services are running on this machine. So if you want to find the users, I typically look at root, and then I look and scroll all the way to the bottom to see what's been installed besides what's on this machine. So in here, we can see some things like SSH, which is important. We know, okay, this has the capability of running SSH. Maybe it has an SSH service. Maybe it has a SQL service here with the MySQL, OpenVPN. So it's a little bit of information gathering. If we were to land on a machine, for example, and we're a low-level user with no privileges, we could start to look at who are the other users on the computer. Why are they important? How can we get a hold of them? Where are their files located? What kind of services are running on this machine? This is all part of the information gathering stage of ethical hacking, and this file leads to a lot of clues for us. Now, clearing the screen, let's say I want to view the shadow file. The shadow file is the file that contains the password hashes for this machine. I'm going to go ahead and try to type in cat Etsy shadow. Permission denied. Okay, maybe I need to use sudo. Let's try it here, enter our password. Oh, John is not in the sudoers file. This is also called the sudoers file, and you can also call sudo sudo. Depends on your nomenclature and how you pronounce it. I'm a sudo person. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and Control L. We're going to switch user back into Kali, and we're going to take a look at some stuff. So if I go switch user, Kali, it's going to ask me for the password. We're going to enter our password in. And first thing, I want to show you the shadow file before we move on to the sudoers file. So if we go sudo cat Etsy shadow, I think this is important to see. You can come in here and remember how I said with a hash that this is set here. So our root password has not been set. There's no hash in here. And this is security best practice. We don't really want to have a root password unless we absolutely need to. In this instance, we might just want to have certain users that can elevate into root. And then if logging is enabled, we can then see from our logs who accessed that root account at what time. You really don't want to have a root password where anybody can just log in with a known password, because then that eliminates some accountability. So best practice would say, hey, if we have a Linux machine, you get all regular user accounts. And then if you want to run something as an elevated privilege, you're going to do that with your account and then use sudo for that. But looking down here, we can see the hashes for this computer. Okay. And what's interesting actually is Callie and John have the same password, but they have different hashes. And that is sort of unique. If you saw this in a Windows machine, if the password was the same on the local machine, you would see the exact same hash, and that is a clear indicator that password reuse is in play, but here it's not. So the hashing algorithm that's being used is a little bit different, and it's generating different hashes even though the password is the same. Regardless, the password for both of these accounts is password, and that's very weak and can easily be cracked, as we'll find out later on. Okay, now onto the sudoers file. What we're going to do is we're going to do a sudo cat, and we're going to look at Etsy sudoers, just like that. And I might have typed that a little fast, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up for a second. Sudo cat Etsy sudoers. Okay, just like that. It should auto tab complete. And from there, we're going to come in here and we're going to look at who has what privileges. Well, if you see allow members of a group sudo to execute any command, and you see %sudo, so it's calling sudo from somewhere else. Sometimes we can just include users in here. We could say, hey, the user Callie, I want to do these things. Instead, this is saying, hey, anybody a part of this group, I want to be able to do whatever they want. They can execute any commands like they were the root user, essentially. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at who is in that %sudo group. And we can do that by using the grep command. So we can say grep, and we're going to get really familiar with grep in the bash scripting video, but basically think of grep as pulling out a specific string or element out of a file or some contents that you want to see. It's a great way to narrow down specifics and pull down only the information that you want, and we're going to get really familiar with it here in a couple of videos. So we're going to say grep, and then we're going to say sudo, just like this. And we're going to do that from Etsy group. Okay, and it says who has the sudo privilege. Here, all we see is Callie. So our user has sudo privilege. If we wanted to give privileges to John, we'd have to add John to the sudo group in the Etsy group. Or we could add John specifically to the sudoers file and give him specific permissions as well. And as we move on in the course and we get into privilege escalation, and if you ever go into more of the privilege escalation courses that we have, you'll see that we look at sudo privileges immediately when we get onto a machine by doing something like sudo-l, and we'll take a look at those and say, okay, what commands can I run? And in this instance, we could see, okay, all commands can be run here. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we can only run one specific command, or maybe John, for example, we want John to be able to run Python because John's a developer. So John can run Python with sudo privileges, but cannot run anything else. So something to think about. Depending on the individual and who we want to give permissions to on that machine, they might not have privileges to access everything as sudo. They can actually be limited in what they can run as well. So that is it for this video. I'm going to go ahead and catch you in the next one. Now we're going to touch on networking commands that are relevant to penetration testing and relevant to this course. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the IP command, and that is IPA. IPA lists all is the way I like to think about it. And you can see here that we have a loopback address and we have our ETH0. This is our Ethernet address. And you can see that we have an IP address here, IPv4, of 192.168.138.140. We are on a /24 subnet. And here is our broadcast address here. We can also see our IPv6 here, which is nice. And we can see our MAC address here. So we can also look at this through the ifconfig command. And that will show us the same things. Here's Ethernet 0. Here is the loopback. All the same information here. ifconfig is the old school way of doing it. IPA is the newer way of doing it. IPA is nice and colorful. If I'm being honest, I still use ifconfig because I like the old school way of doing things. But IPA is the new way of doing things, and in some instances, ifconfig requires sudo to even run or may no longer be on a machine. But in some instances, IP is not on a machine. Depending on what type of machine you're on and what you access, you may need either one of these, so it's great to show you both. Now, while the IPA does all, IF only shows the Ethernet connection, so the hardwired connections. If we want to see wireless connections, we need to do IWconfig. And in this instance, you're going to see down here that we have no wireless connections right now. When we get into wireless hacking, we'll see that we have connections established and we'll use the IWconfig command. But just know for now that it's for wireless, and if you ever need to use it, that's what it's for. Let's clear our screen, and the next thing I want to cover is the IPN, and N stands for neighbor. The alternative to this is the ARP-A. Okay, what is ARP? If you do not know what ARP is, that is the Address Resolution Protocol. This comes from your networking. If you are not familiar with networking, then you may need to go study up on a little bit of this. Now, ARP says what IP address is associated with what MAC address. And what happens is a broadcast message goes out when we are trying to identify an IP address and a MAC address. So broadcast goes out and it says, who has this IP address? And whoever has the IP address will come back and it'll say, hey, that's me. I have that IP address and here is my MAC address. So now you can associate my MAC address with this IP address. And it is a way to identify these two items together and link them up. So again, in this instance, we can use the IP command or the old ARP command. Now, the IP command is a little bit prettier and a little bit more colorful, and I think easier to read, in my opinion, but either will work in this situation. Another IP command that we're going to want to run and know is the IPR command. Now, R stands for route. You could also type in route, and you'll get similar feedback here. So what we're looking at is what is called a routing table. We want to know where our traffic is routing. And here you can see on either one of these that we're routing through 192.168.138.0. We have an open gateway. We can see the gateway here is 138.2. We can see our mask here, and we can find all that information out up here as well. So it's important to know the routing and what's going on, especially if you are in a network, for example, where you might have multiple routes. Say if we come in and we say, oh, IPA, okay, we're on the 192.168.138 network, but we just try to connect to only the machines on this network. We see a /24, we think, okay, well, I know a /24 has 255 potential IP addresses, and I'm going to go ahead and just stick to scanning that subnet and looking for those IPs on that subnet. Well, if you looked at the routing table, you might actually see that there's a 137 in here, or 136, or maybe a 10 IP address, or something different than what you have here. Maybe you have the ability to talk to other networks, even though you're on this 1/24 network. Very important to look at the routing table. It's also important because in real life pen tests, we have been on a quote unquote segmented network. And in reality, it really wasn't a segmented network. There just wasn't a route to that network. So they said that we were isolated and we couldn't access anything. And all we had to do was say, okay, we're going to go add that network to our routing table. And what do you know? We were able to scan and connect to the network. So being able to know your routing table, being able to understand what a route is and how to add routes, how to remove routes can become important as well. These are things that you should already know from general networking. I'm showing you the commands here for basic routing and how to display the routing tables. If you need further information on routing tables, you should go look that up and research that before continuing on with the ethical hacking course. Okay, last command I want to get through. That is the ping command. So I'm going to do an ifconfig again. And in this instance, I'm just going to ping 192.168.138. And I believe earlier I saw a .2 was my gateway. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit enter. That should talk back to me, and it does. Now, if you are a Windows user and you've ever used ping before, it will only send 4 packets out. So it'll check 4 times. As you can see here, we are getting more than 4 packets sent. We are sending indefinitely. And I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control-C and stop that. We are definitely seeing that we're getting responses back. Now, there is a way to limit the amount that we send and the amount of traffic that we're sending. But basically what we're doing with the ping command is we're saying, hey, are you there? Are you alive? Can you respond to me and let me know you're there? So I asked the machine at this IP address to respond and tell me, yes, I am here. Now, this is called ICMP traffic. Not all machines permit ICMP traffic. Just because we ping a machine and it does not respond does not mean that it's not online. Okay? There are machines that have ICMP disabled and will not respond to ping requests. But ping is a quick way to see if a machine is online, and typically by default, ping or ICMP is enabled on most machines. Just as a further example, we can ping a machine that we do not believe to be alive. So I'm going to change this to a 3. I don't think there's a 3 on my network. And you're going to see it's going to try to send data, and it's just going to get stuck here and say host unreachable. Now again, that could potentially mean that that host is not there, or it could potentially mean that the host has ICMP disabled. But we're going to be using ping sweeping to identify a host in our network. And we'll do that here in just a couple of videos, but I wanted you to get familiar with the ping command if you weren't familiar already. Now, there are some commands in this video that we did not talk about. For example, the netstat command. Now, the netstat command is used to identify what open ports and services are there. We'll take a look at that more later on, but just know that that command exists and that we're going to do due diligence on that command later. So any of you that are watching that have a networking background or are like, hey, you didn't show netstat, that's so important, you're correct. It's coming later on in the course. So that's it for this video. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Let's now talk about viewing, creating, and editing files. And we've done a little bit of this in the course already. You've seen me do something like echo hello, and remember that prints out to the screen. And we could just echo that again, like a hello, and put that into a file. And you've seen me do that. We'll just call this one hey.txt. And if we ls, we should see hey.txt right here. If we do a cat hey.txt, we should print out to the screen hello. All these should be pretty familiar to you. So let's build upon this. Let's talk about how we can append to this and overwrite these files in different ways that we can actually create and edit files. So I'm going to clear the screen here. Now, what if I wanted to add to this file, and I'm just tabbing up, by the way. What if I want to say hello again? So I want to say echo hello again into this hey.txt file that already exists. What do we think is going to happen here? So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and then I'm going to cat out the hey.txt. Well, now it says hello again. It used to say hello. Well, that is because when we use one greater than symbol like this, what's going to happen is that overwrites the file. So if we tab up, and if we go over and we just write hey again, just for fun, and let's add a second one of these. So now there should be two of these greater than symbols. We hit enter, we cat out hey.txt, and now you can see it says hello again and hello again. Why do we care? Why are we doing this? Well, when we are using scripting, for example, and we want to loop through a bunch of information and we want to add that information to a file, we might use something like this where if we're gathering, say, IP addresses, this is foreshadowing, by the way, say we're gathering IP addresses and we are wanting to put them all in a file, we're going to need to use something like a double greater than in order to not overwrite the file with one IP address. We want to list all the IP addresses in the file. So you're going to see that when we get into the bash scripting of this section. Let's clear our screen. Another way that we can make a new file is just to say touch new file.txt. And if we ls, you can see that new file.txt is here. We can cat out new file.txt, and nothing is going to be in there because we didn't tell it to do anything. We just said touch, which creates a file. So we can use a different type of editor to try and edit this and save the file. Now, there are a few editors that we can use within our terminal. So we can use something called Nano, which is my personal favorite. You may hear other people talk about Vi and Vim. You may hear lots of jokes about quitting Vim and how it's impossible to quit Vim. And for that reason, honestly, because of the complications and because I like simplicity, I just use Nano. So we can Nano new file. And in here, you can type whatever you want. I'm going to literally say, I can type whatever I want in here. And now I'm going to hit Control X. And throughout this course, you're going to actually see me use Nano quite a bit. And we're going to use it for updating files and shellcode. And it's beneficial if we log into a machine remotely, for example, and we won't have the ability to have a graphical user interface type notepad, which I'm going to show you here in a second. We might not have the luxury of having something like that. We might have to use Nano or Vim or an in-terminal text editor. So we're going to go ahead and hit Control X here. I'm going to hit Y, which is going to say, yes, I want to save this file. And then I'm going to hit enter. And now if I cat out new file.txt, you can see it says I can type whatever I want in here. Lastly, we're going to look at a graphical notepad. So we're going to use mousepad. We can type in mousepad. And we can just say new file.txt, just like we created. And in here, you can see that it says I can type whatever I want in here, and that's true. I can also modify. It's just like a notepad if you had on Windows machine or if you've used LeafPad or any sort of notepad type material. This one's just called mousepad. So we can Control S and save and then just exit out. If we cat out our new file again, you can see I can also modify. Now, throughout this course, you might see me use a tool called gedit. It is not installed on this machine yet. Though we are making updates to the course, we will be using gedit. Anytime you see me use gedit, feel free to use mousepad instead of gedit. It's become deprecated. Offensive security got rid of it in Kali Linux, and now if you go hit gedit, it'll say it's not found, but you can install it. We're not going to do that right now. But when we install tools in a upcoming video, you will be able to install that with one of the tools that we're running. So anyway, just note that we're going to be using mousepad instead of gedit because it's the new and latest and greatest. One last thing, with Nano or any of these tools, you can make a brand new file. So you can say like brand new file.txt, and then you can type whatever in here and Control X, hit Y, hit enter, and then you can cat out brand new file, and guess what? It's there. So the file doesn't have to be